welcome to my channel. My name is Tiffany of Tiffany Gordon Cosplay, and today on the cosplay tutorial I have the third weapon of Arcane Jinx, which is the minigun. And I'm going to be going over how I made this weapon out of EVA foam and piping, and also how to make it disassemble for transportation. But before we begin, remember to like this video as well as subscribe to our channel, and then we can begin. And for this piece, it took a lot of materials and by far is the hardest to make out of the three weapons of Jinx, but I'm gonna try to walk you through it, and these are what I used, but you don't necessarily have to use everything here. And I used 2, 4, 6, 10, and 12mm EVA foam, half round foam dowels, round foam dowels, CPVC pipe size 3/4 inch, 12-inch sink tailpiece, Sharpies, X-Acto knife, and a box cutter, Costools circle cutter, Costools hole drills, a cutting mat, a jeweler's saw, a Dremel and sanding drum, heat gun, sandpaper, sandable spray paint, contact cement glue, and of course all the safety gear. And I'll have links to all of this in the description. And let's not forget about a blueprint, and I made a 2D blueprint which is available on my website www.tiffanygordoncosplay.com, as well as I have 4 3D CAD STL files available. These are specifically for the handle pieces on the minigun because these needed to have the most structural support. And you can also find this on my website. To first start off, I 3D modeled each of these 4 handles in a 3D modeling program called Rhino 6 and printed them in PLA filament on my Prusa i3 Mark 2.5 3D printer. And after removing all of the support structure, I did a little bit of a light sanding, followed by using sandable spray paint, applying it to the entire surface. Once it dries, then I got sandpaper and sanded it smooth. And now that that's out of the way, time to talk about the rest of the prop. And I'm gonna split it up into 3 sections just to make it easiest to explain. Starting off with the butt section. And for this piece, I have a pattern in my blueprint specifically for the butt. And for this, you will want to trace each of those pieces onto 4mm EVA foam and cut out with an X-Acto knife. And once cut, you will want to apply contact cement glue and attach each of the pieces together. A helpful tip is starting each of them on one side and slowly working your way to the other using the table to put them flush together so that way you have no cracks. And I did each half, and then once both halves were connected, I then connected the 2 halves to create one. And for this piece, it really will need a support structure, so I took the shape of the side of this piece and I traced that onto 12mm EVA foam and cut it out with a box cutter, and then with contact cement glue attached it into the center seam. This will make it be a lot more sturdy. I then traced the bottom section, which is G, onto 4mm EVA foam and again cut it out and attached it to the bottom part. Now to attach the large handle, and for this I traced where it was going to sit onto the top of the butt piece and then cut it out with a X-Acto knife and glued it in place. For the back handle part, which is going to be for the strap, I used Costools hole drills, and I traced where the piece was going to attach and used the hole drills to remove the circle from that section and then attached it. There is a slight indentation on this minigun, but I decided to do it the opposite and make it where it was a bump on the back. And for this, I used the half round foam dowels and I taped it onto the back, traced it, and then attached it with contact cement glue. Now for the side ventilation-like parts, and for this, I traced the outer piece of it onto 2mm EVA foam, and then for the strip sections in the center, I traced and cut out of 4mm EVA foam. I then glued it to the actual body of the minigun. For the rim part of it, I cut it out of 6mm EVA foam, I sanded the edges where they would attach, and then I glued it to the outer section of this vent part. Now that those pieces are attached, it's time to sand. And for this, I did it by hand using a paint mixing stick and attaching 120 grit to the top part, and then just sanding around each of the seams and then doing a light sand for the rest of the surface so it'd give a more even, consistent look. Once that was done, I did a light heat treat onto it so that way it wouldn't be as fluffy, and then I went down to a 220 grit sandpaper and continued the same process. For the bottom trim part that it sits on, I traced this onto 12mm EVA foam and I did it 3 times. I then glued each of the pieces together, and then for the top one, I trimmed the edge ever so slightly with a box cutter, and then went to my workbench and sanded it with a sanding drum. And then attached that piece to the butt. I will note that I applied this farther back and there was about 24mm of space in front of it. The reason being is it's gonna have one more 12 piece of EVA foam, as well as to another section for it to disassemble, it will have another 12 that will fill that spot. And the last piece for this butt section is going to be the one that glues in front of it, and there is in the blueprint a section that is H. The H one is too small for this piece, so use it more as a guideline to see how much you will need to add to the outer trim of this. Probably about 1 inch or 2, depending on how large you want the piece to get. But I did this onto 12mm EVA foam and repeated all the same processes and then glued it to the front. And that should be it for the butt section. The next section we're going to be talking about is the middle section. And the first part that I'm going to be talking about is the cylinder section, which is the part that is in the center. And for this piece, with the help of the blueprint, I got the length of the circle in the center and then did the formula for getting a circle, which then gave me the length to make my rectangle. And for this, I cut it out of 10mm EVA foam, and then drew on where the cylinder flutes would be, and with the help of Costools hole drill, cut a hole where the ends of each of them were, and then I could use a box cutter to cut the straight lines next. And your piece should now look like a comb. Also for this piece, it tapers on either side, so I drew a line and then sanded them with a sanding drum. And this piece also needs a little bit of support, so for this, I traced the same rectangle shape onto 6mm EVA foam and glued these 2 pieces together. And then glued those 2 seams together to make a circle. I'll note that it doesn't really matter what the seam looks like because you're gonna glue this facing downward so nobody's gonna see it. I then, for the next handle piece, which is the strap part, I then traced where it was going to sit on this section, and then again using the Costools hole drill, cut those holes out and then glued the handle part in place. For the bottom section that's kind of pointy, I did this out of 6mm EVA foam, as well as for the circle triangle-like pieces, I cut 2 of these out of 12mm EVA foam and sanded them with a sanding drum. Next step was to heat treat all of these pieces with a heat gun and then slowly start to assemble them. I will also note, once I assembled all of these pieces, I didn't like that there was just a gap on the bottom, so I did end up adding a rectangle that I glued slanted inside, and this also helped with the structural support. But after this, your middle section should be done. And now for the barrel section, the very front part. For these, I traced the main sections onto 10 and 12mm EVA foam, cutting each one out twice, and then heat treated and glued them together. I also at this time cut out a circle using Costools circle cutter, and then I rounded all of the edges of each of these with a sanding drum. For the barrel pieces, each one of the barrels inserts into a circle piece, And for this, I used Cosstools Circle Cutter, cutting the small circle first that was the same circumference of my barrel piping. And then after that, I cut the outer circle. These would give me Cheerio-like shapes. And for doing this, I highly recommend beforehand putting a center dot so you know where to align your piece every time when cutting it, and also leaving the first circle after it's cut in place, just so that way it'll help you for aligning. And you will need a total of 6 of these. Once that was done, back to the workbench and then rounded them out. For the barrel pieces, I found these at either Home Depot or Lowe's, but they are the 12-inch sink tailpiece. And these are really, really lightweight, lighter than using PVC or CPVC. And with a jeweler saw, I cut them a little bit shorter. Also note that these pieces had some branding elements that were higher raised, so I did file these away so it was more smooth. Next, I glued the circle to this shaped piece. And then I put the tubing as well as the Cheerio circle parts onto where it was going to sit and traced it around the base. This way I would know where to cut out the circle. I will note, you might want to do all these before it's all assembled because it was extremely hard to carve out this section. But in the end, if you do this individually, then it'll be easier, but you have to worry with it aligning, so it's kind of however you think will work best, but this is how I did it. And afterwards, I cleaned up all of the edges as well as the cut out holes with a sanding drum. There are on these pieces where they have the bottom foot things, there is 2 rods that go up and down there, and for this, I cut out 2 pieces of round EVA foam dowel rods. And then I applied contact cement glue, waited for it to dry, and then attached each of the pieces. As well as attaching a rectangle piece that goes onto the top. This one, it was out of 12mm EVA foam, and it should be the same length as the round EVA foam dowels. For the main front handle, I cut out a 3/4 inch CPVC pipe with my jeweler's saw, and this size CPVC pipe should fit inside the hole for your last 3D printed handle. And I've traced where it was going to sit on the foam. I did carve out a little bit of the foam so this piece would be inserted downward into it, and then I glued it into place. Now that that's done, it's time to attach the front section to the middle section, and again with contact cement glue. And the very last piece to cut out of foam is going to be the tip of the barrels, and for this I highly recommend making a piece of paper mock-up first. But basically I cut out a rectangle strip, and then I did a slight lower angle on both sides that went upwards to the center at a more rounder point. And this part also has a taper where it connects to the barrel, so I drew a straight line and sanded this section. And once that was done and then I heat treated, I then attached it to each of the barrels, having the seam face towards the center. And remember at the very beginning when I said that this piece detaches into 2 pieces and that the butt, we left a little 12mm lip for another piece to insert next to it? Well, this is that section. After figuring out where it was going to sit onto the front and middle section, I then glued that in place, and at this point, if you want it to be one single piece, you can glue the 2 halves together, but this is how I did my process so it would come apart into the 2 sections. I first started off by cutting 2 3/4 inch CPVC pipes, around 3 to 4 inches each, and I left an indentation into the front foam of where I wanted to sit, and then with Cosstools hole drill, I ended up inserting it and removing that section of the foam. I then inserted the CPVC pipes into them temporarily, and then I pushed the butt where it would align, so this way it would leave indentations onto the butt side, and I repeated the same process to remove that foam with the Cost Tools hole drill. The next step is to glue the CPVC pipes in place, and I first used contact cement glue to attach them into the butt side, but it wasn't quite strong enough, so I ended up using hot glue to permanently attach it in place. I will say that for doing the hot glue, you have to work extremely fast and make sure you insert the CPVC pipe in time and hold it in place to harden, or you're gonna have some problems. But after that, the only thing left is to push the two pieces together and you're done. I will note it is going to be a little bit of a struggle to put it together, but that's good because that means it won't separate. And in the painting video, I will be adding Velcro underneath this as well to help with the attachment, so stay tuned for that video to see the next part. And that, guys, is how I made Arcane Jinx's minigun from League of Legends. I hope you found this video helpful for making your own, as well as don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what you thought about this build. There are also other Arcane Jinx weapons if you're interested in watching those videos. I'll have links in the description, as well as a big thank you to all of my sponsors and all of my members on YouTube, specifically my legendary members who really help support me making financially more tutorials such like this. So do consider helping and becoming a member here. And I will see you for our next tutorial, which will be how to paint this minigun, and see you next time. Bye! Legendary blah 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 blah. Okay, restart.